A cloudy morning covered the local zoo, surrounded by empty streets and still trees. A white lion cub crossed the enclosure and stopped next to a closed manhole, staring at the ground. Ignoring the keeper's calls, the cub stayed seated, ears up as if listening to something. A family approached and noticed a faint sound coming from inside. Police arrived, forced the cover open with heavy tools. The metal screeched, the lid gave way, and in the very next second, no one could believe what came out. Love animal stories? Then subscribe now and don't miss any. Thanks for following us. Now, back to our story. The morning sun cast long shadows across the peaceful walkways of Riverside Zoo in Cedar Falls, Iowa, as Sarah Mitchell unlocked the gates for another day. As the head zookeeper, she had witnessed countless magical moments between animals and visitors over her 15 years at the facility, but nothing had prepared her for the phenomenon that was about to unfold before her eyes. In the African savannah, Exhibit, a small white lion cub named Apollo, had become the undisputed star of the zoo. His pristine white coat gleamed like fresh snow against the golden prairie grass of his enclosure, and his piercing blue eyes held an intelligence that seemed almost human. Visitors would gather around his habitat for hours, watching him play with enrichment toys or chase butterflies across the expansive outdoor space. Apollo had arrived at Riverside Zoo just 3 months ago, a rescue from a breeding facility that could no longer care for him. Despite his young age of 6 months, he had quickly adapted to his new home, and the dedicated care team, led by Sarah and her assistant keeper, Marcus Thompson. The cub's playful nature and curious personality had made him an instant favorite among both staff and visitors. But this particular Tuesday morning, something was different. Sarah noticed it first as she made her routine rounds through the exhibits. Apollo, who typically greeted her with enthusiastic chirps and playful pounces against the viewing glass, was nowhere to be seen in his usual spots. Instead, she found him at the far corner of his outdoor enclosure, sitting perfectly still and staring intently through the chain-link fence that bordered the zoo's perimeter. "That's odd," Sarah murmured to herself, pulling out her radio. "Marcus, are you at the African exhibit yet?" Marcus's voice crackled through the device. "Just heading there now, Sarah. Everything okay?" "Apollo's acting strange. Can you come check on him when you get a chance?" 20 minutes later, Marcus joined Sarah at the observation deck overlooking Apollo's habitat. The white cub remained in the exact same position, his small body rigid with concentration as he gazed towards something beyond the fence. His ears were perked forward, rotating slightly, as if tracking a sound that neither Sarah nor Marcus could hear. "How long has he been like this?" Marcus asked, concern evident in his voice. At 28, Marcus had worked with big cats for over 5 years and had never seen behavior quite like this since I got here an hour ago. "I've called his name, offered treats, even tried his favorite toy. Nothing gets his attention." They watched in fascination as Apollo slowly rose to his feet, still maintaining his fixed gaze on something beyond their view. The cub took several deliberate steps closer to the fence, then sat down again in the exact same rigid posture. "What's over there?" Marcus wondered aloud, pulling out his binoculars to scan the area beyond Apollo's enclosure. Beyond the zoo's perimeter lay a quiet, residential street lined with mature oak trees. A sidewalk ran parallel to the fence, and in the distance they could make out the daily rhythm of suburban life. Joggers making their morning rounds, dog walkers with their companions, and the occasional delivery truck rumbling past. "Nothing unusual that I can see," Marcus reported, lowering the binoculars. "Just the normal neighborhood activity." Sarah frowned, studying Apollo's behavior more closely. In all her years working with animals, she had learned to trust their instincts. Animals often sense things that humans missed, and their behavior frequently served as early warning systems for everything from natural disasters to simple changes in their environment. Let's keep monitoring him throughout the day, she decided. Maybe it's just a temporary fascination with something new. But as the morning progressed, Apollo's behavior became even more pronounced. When the zoo opened to the public at 10 o'clock, families and school groups began filtering into the African savanna exhibit, eager to catch a glimpse of the famous white lion cub. However, instead of his usual enthusiastic interactions with visitors, Apollo remained focused on that mysterious spot beyond the fence. "Mom, why isn't the lion playing?" asked 8-year-old Emily, Chen pressing her face against the viewing glass with disappointment. Her mother, Dr. Jennifer Chen, a local pediatrician who frequently brought her daughter to the zoo, studied Apollo's unusual posture with professional curiosity. "He seems very focused on something, honey. Animals have much better hearing than we do. Maybe he's listening to something we can't hear." As if responding to her words, Apollo suddenly stood up and walked in a small circle, his movements restless and agitated. He returned to his original position and resumed his vigilant watch, but now his tail was twitching with obvious anxiety. "That's definitely not normal behavior," Dr. Chen observed quietly to her daughter. "Lions, even young ones, don't usually fixate on one spot for hours unless there's a very good reason." Word of Apollo's strange behavior began to spread among the zoo's regular visitors. By noon, a small crowd had gathered specifically to observe the white cub's mysterious vigil. Some visitors speculated that he was watching other animals in the distance, while others suggested he might be sensing changes in the weather. Sarah found herself checking on Apollo every 30 minutes throughout the day, each time hoping to find him back to his normal, playful self. Instead, the cub's behavior was becoming more intense. He had refused his morning meal, which was highly unusual for a growing lion cub with a typically voracious appetite. "This is really starting to worry me," Sarah confided to Dr. Rebecca Hayes, the zoo's veterinarian, during their afternoon consultation. "Apollo has never refused food before, and this focused behavior has been going on for 6 hours straight." Dr. Hayes, a woman in her 40s with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes, had been the zoo's primary veterinarian for nearly 2 decades. She had seen every type of animal behavior imaginable, from the subtle to the dramatic. Any changes in his physical condition, lethargy, limping, anything that might indicate illness or injury, she asked, reviewing Apollo's recent medical records. "On her tablet, none that we can observe. He moves normally when he does move, his breathing appears regular, and his eyes are clear and alert. It's just this intense fixation that has us concerned." Dr. Hayes nodded thoughtfully. "I'd like to observe him myself this afternoon. Sometimes animals exhibit unusual behaviors in response to environmental stimuli that we're not immediately aware of. It could be anything from ultrasonic sounds to scent markers we can't detect." As the afternoon wore on, Apollo's behavior showed no signs of changing. If anything, his focus seemed to intensify as the day progressed. He would occasionally stand up, pace a few steps, and then return to his watchful position. His ears remained constantly alert, swiveling toward that invisible point of interest beyond the zoo's boundary. The zoo's maintenance supervisor, Tom Rodriguez, stopped by the exhibit during his routine afternoon inspection. Tom had worked at Riverside Zoo for over 20 years and had developed an intuitive understanding of the facility's rhythms and patterns. "You know," he said to Sarah as they watched Apollo together, "there's an old storm drain system that runs under that whole neighborhood. built back in the 1960s when they developed that residential area. Most people don't even know it's there. Sarah looked at him with renewed interest. A storm drain system? How close would it run to the zoo's perimeter? Pretty close, I'd imagine. The main line probably runs right under that street there. Tom pointed toward the area where Apollo continued his vigilant watch. Could be something going on down there that the cub can hear but we can't. This revelation added a new dimension to the mystery. If Apollo was indeed detecting sounds from an underground drainage system, it could explain his unwavering focus on that particular location. But what could be happening in a storm drain that would capture and hold a lion cub's attention for an entire day? As closing time approached, Sarah made one final check on Apollo. The white cub remained in position, though she could see signs of fatigue in his posture. His head was still raised and alert, but his body showed the weariness of maintaining such focused attention for nearly 10 hours. We'll keep a close eye on him tonight, Sarah assured Marcus as they completed their evening rounds. If this behavior continues tomorrow, we'll need to investigate further. Neither of them could have imagined that Apollo's mysterious vigil was just the beginning of a discovery that would not only change their understanding of animal intuition, but also expose a troubling situation that had been hidden beneath their feet for far too long. The white lion cub's extraordinary senses were about to reveal a secret that would unite an entire community in an unexpected mission of rescue and hope. The next morning brought no relief to the growing mystery surrounding Apollo's behavior. Sarah arrived at the zoo an hour earlier than usual, hoping to find the white lion cub back to his normal playful self. Instead, she discovered him in the exact same position as the previous evening, as if he had maintained his vigilant watch throughout the entire night. The overnight security guard, David Kim, a soft-spoken man in his 50s, who had worked the night shift for 7 years, was waiting for Sarah at the main office with an expression of concern on his weathered face. "Sarah, I need to tell you something about last night," David began, settling into the chair across from her desk. "I've been doing rounds at this zoo for years, and I've never experienced anything quite like what happened." Sarah looked up from her morning reports, giving David her full attention. The overnight security team rarely had much to report beyond the occasional maintenance issue or weather-related concern. "What happened, David?" "It's about Apollo. Around 2 in the morning, during my regular patrol, I noticed he was still in that same spot by the fence. But here's the thing that really got my attention. He started making sounds I've never heard from him before. Not exactly roars, but these low, almost mournful calls, like he was trying to communicate with something." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "How long did this go on?" "About 20 minutes. And here's the strangest part. After each sound Apollo made, there would be this period of complete silence, like he was listening for a response. Then he'd make another call, wait again, and repeat the whole process." David paused, running his hand through his graying hair as he searched for the right words to describe what he had witnessed. "Sarah, I've worked with animals my whole life. Before coming here, that cub wasn't just making random sounds. He was trying to communicate with something or someone. This new information transformed Apollo's behavior from merely unusual to genuinely alarming." Sarah immediately contacted Marcus and Dr. Hayes, requesting an emergency meeting before the zoo opened to the public. An hour later, the small team gathered at the African Savannah exhibit, where Apollo continued his steadfast vigil. Dr. Hayes brought along specialized acoustic equipment she sometimes used to monitor animal vocalizations for research purposes. "If Apollo is indeed responding to sounds we can't hear, this equipment should help us detect them," she explained, setting up a highly sensitive directional microphone and connecting it to a digital recording device. Marcus positioned himself with binoculars to observe Apollo's body language and behavior patterns, while Sarah coordinated with Tom Rodriguez to get more detailed information about the underground drainage system. According to the city engineering department, Tom reported via radio, the main storm drain line runs directly under Cedar Avenue, about 50 feet from the zoo's perimeter. Offense. There are several access points along that route, including a maintenance cover right in front of the Patterson house. Sarah looked through the fence toward the residential street, where a modest two-story home with blue shutters sat directly across from Apollo's position. A concrete circle in the sidewalk marked the location of what must be the drainage access, a point Tom had mentioned. That's interesting, Dr. Hayes observed, adjusting her equipment. Apollo's gaze is fixed almost exactly on that spot. For the next 2 hours, they maintained their observation post, recording every nuance of Apollo's behavior. The white cub would shift positions slightly, turn his head a few degrees, and occasionally emit those soft, questioning calls that David had described. At exactly 10:47 a.m., Dr. Hayes suddenly straightened up and grabbed her headphones. "Wait, I'm picking up something," she announced, her voice filled with excitement and concern. "There are definitely sounds coming from the direction Apollo is watching." Sarah and Marcus moved closer as Dr. Hayes fine-tuned her equipment. Through the sensitive microphone, they could hear the subtle vibrations and acoustic signatures that Apollo's superior hearing had been detecting all along. "What kind of sounds?" Sarah asked, though she wasn't entirely sure she wanted to know the answer. "They're very faint, but they're definitely there. It sounds like movement, maybe scratching or scraping, and there's something else." Dr. Hayes paused, her expression growing more troubled. "There are what sound like very soft vocalizations, almost like whimpering." The implications of this discovery sent a wave of unease through the small group. If there were indeed sounds of distress coming from the underground drainage system, it could mean that something or someone was trapped down there. Apollo, as if sensing their growing understanding, stood up and walked closer to the fence. He positioned himself as near as possible to the concrete access cover across the street and released a series of those low, mournful calls that David had described. "He's trying to let whatever is down there know that he's aware of them," Marcus observed with amazement. "Look at his posture. He's not showing any signs of predatory behavior. This is protective, almost nurturing." Dr. Hayes continued to monitor the acoustic readings, documenting every sound and Apollo's corresponding responses. The pattern was becoming clear. Apollo would vocalize, wait for a response, and then repeat the process. During the waiting periods, the underground sounds would sometimes intensify, as if whatever was down there was indeed responding to the lion cub's calls. "We need to contact the city utilities department," Sarah decided. "If there's something trapped in that drainage system, we have an obligation to investigate." While Sarah made the necessary phone calls, Marcus remained with Apollo, documenting the cub's behavior with video recordings that would later prove crucial in understanding the full scope of the situation. "The city engineer is sending a team out this afternoon," Sarah reported when she returned. "They'll do a preliminary inspection of the drainage system to determine if there are any obvious problems or obstructions." As word of the planned investigation began to spread among the zoo staff, several other team members joined the observation. A group, Jennifer Walsh, the zoo's education coordinator, arrived with a group of volunteer docents who had been scheduled to lead school tours that day. "We've been getting questions from visitors all morning about Apollo's behavior," Jennifer explained. "Some of the regulars who come here frequently are really concerned. They say they've never seen him act like this before." The growing crowd of observers included Dr. Chen and her daughter Emily, who had returned specifically to check on Apollo's condition. Emily's young eyes were bright with curiosity and concern as she watched the white cub maintain his patient vigil. "Mom, do you think there's really something down there?" Emily asked, pressing her small hand against the viewing glass. Dr. Chen studied Apollo's unwavering focus and considered everything they had learned. "Animals have senses we don't fully understand, honey. If Apollo thinks something down there needs help, he's probably right." As noon approached, the mystery deepened when Apollo's behavior began to show subtle changes. Instead of maintaining his constant watch, he started to pace in small patterns, always returning to the same observation point, but displaying increasing signs of agitation. "His stress levels are definitely increasing," Dr. Hayes noted, observing Apollo's body language. "Whatever is happening down there, it's becoming more urgent." The acoustic monitoring equipment continued to pick up the faint underground sounds, and Dr. Hayes began to notice patterns in their intensity and frequency. The sounds seemed to be strongest during certain times of the day, particularly in the morning and early afternoon. "It's almost like there's a schedule to whatever is happening down there," she observed, reviewing the recordings. "The sounds are more frequent and intense during specific time periods." Tom Rodriguez arrived with additional information from the city engineering department. "They pulled the original construction blueprints from 1963, he reported. "That drainage system is more extensive than we thought. It connects to a network of underground channels that run throughout this entire neighborhood." The scope of the potential situation was becoming more apparent with each new piece of information. If something was indeed trapped in the underground system, finding the exact location and determining the best way to provide assistance would require careful planning and coordination. Apollo seemed to sense the increased activity and attention surrounding his vigil. His calls became more frequent and his movements more purposeful. It was as if he understood that help was finally on the way and was doing everything in his power to maintain communication with whatever lay hidden beneath the streets. As the afternoon approached and the city utilities team prepared to begin their investigation, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the verge of a discovery that would change everything. Apollo's extraordinary behavior had already drawn the attention of the local community, and she suspected that whatever they found in those underground tunnels would have far-reaching implications for everyone involved. The white lion cub's persistent vigil was about to reveal secrets that had been hidden in the darkness below, and Sarah knew that their quiet zoo community would never be quite the same again. The city utilities team arrived at Cedar Avenue at precisely 2:30 p.m., led by Chief Inspector Robert Hayes, a stocky man with calloused hands and 30 years of experience dealing with municipal infrastructure. His team consisted of 3 technicians, equipped with specialized tools for accessing and inspecting underground systems. Sarah, Marcus, and Dr. Hayes had positioned themselves at the observation deck overlooking Apollo's enclosure, maintaining their acoustic monitoring while the investigation proceeded across the street. The white lion cub's behavior had intensified throughout the morning, and his calls were now coming at regular 5-minute intervals. "Apollo's definitely trying to communicate with whatever is down there," Marcus observed, noting the cub's increasingly purposeful movements. "Look how he positions himself at the exact angle to project his voice toward that access point." Chief Inspector Hayes waved to Sarah from across the street, indicating that his team was ready to begin the preliminary inspection. The concrete access cover that had captured Apollo's attention sat innocuously in the sidewalk, surrounded by the ordinary suburban landscape of the Patterson neighborhood. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, a 72-year-old retired teacher who lived in the blue shuttered house adjacent to the access point, emerged from her front door with obvious curiosity. She had noticed the unusual activity and was concerned about potential problems with the city infrastructure. "Is there something wrong with the drainage system?" she asked Chief Inspector Hayes, wrapping a light cardigan around her shoulders, despite the warm afternoon temperature. "We're just conducting a routine inspection based on some reports of unusual sounds," the inspector replied diplomatically, not wanting to alarm the elderly woman with speculation about what they might find. The first challenge became apparent immediately when the team attempted to remove the concrete cover. What should have been a straightforward process using standard equipment proved surprisingly difficult. The cover appeared to be secured more tightly than normal municipal access points. "This is unusual," commented Jake Miller, one of the younger technicians on the team. "These covers are designed for easy removal during maintenance. This one feels like it's been sealed or has some kind of obstruction." Chief Inspector Hayes examined the access point more closely, running his hands around the perimeter of the concrete circle. "There's definitely something not right here. The seal around this cover is much tighter than standard installation would produce." Meanwhile, Apollo's behavior across the street was becoming increasingly agitated. The white cub paced back and forth along the fence line, emitting his characteristic low calls with growing frequency and intensity. It was as if he sensed that help was finally arriving and was doing everything possible to guide the rescuers to the right location. Dr. Hayes, monitoring the acoustic equipment, noticed a significant change in the underground sounds. "The vocalizations from below are getting stronger," she reported via radio to Sarah. "Whatever is down there is definitely responding to the activity above ground." The utility team worked for nearly an hour, attempting to loosen the stubborn access cover using progressively more powerful tools. Standard prying equipment proved insufficient, requiring them to call for hydraulic assistance from the fire department. Captain Michael Rodriguez of the Cedar Falls Fire Department arrived with a specialized hydraulic unit typically used for vehicle extractions. The 38-year-old captain had responded to countless emergency calls throughout his 15-year career, but this particular situation was unlike anything he had encountered before. "What's the story here?" Captain Rodriguez asked Chief. Inspector Hayes, as his team, positioned the hydraulic equipment around the access point. "We have reports of sounds coming from this drainage system. The cover is secured much more tightly than normal, which suggests there might be some kind of obstruction or deliberate sealing." As the fire department team prepared their equipment, a small crowd of neighborhood residents began to gather. The Patterson family from the adjacent house was joined by the Johnsons from across the street and several other curious neighbors who had noticed the unusual activity. Among the observers was retired veterinarian Dr. William Thompson, Marcus's father, who had been visiting his son at the zoo when the investigation began. Dr. Thompson had spent 40 years working with animals and immediately recognized the significance of Apollo's behavior. "That lion cub is exhibiting classic distress signaling behavior," he observed to the gathered crowd. "In the wild, lions use similar vocalizations to maintain contact with separated pride members or to signal the location of trapped individuals." His professional assessment added weight to the growing suspicion that something serious was happening beneath the street. The hydraulic equipment finally engaged with the stubborn access cover, and the first attempts to lift it revealed just how extensively the cover had been secured. "This definitely wasn't done by city workers," Chief Inspector Hayes concluded after examining the exposed edges of the cover. "Someone has deliberately sealed this access point, and they did a very thorough job of it." Apollo's calls across the street became almost frantic as the hydraulic equipment continued its work. The white cub positioned himself as close to the fence as possible, his blue eyes fixed intently on the rescue operation. His vocalizations now came in rapid succession, as if he was trying to communicate urgency to both the rescuers and whatever lay beneath the street. "The acoustic readings are spiking," Dr. Hayes reported from her monitoring station. "There's definitely increased activity down there in response to the attempted access." After 2 hours of careful work, the hydraulic unit finally succeeded in breaking the seal around the access cover. As the concrete disc was slowly lifted away, a wave of stale, humid air emerged from the opening, carrying with it the unmistakable evidence that the drainage system had been compromised. Chief Inspector Hayes peered into the dark opening with a high-powered flashlight, his expression growing more serious with each passing moment. "We're going to need additional assistance," he announced, pulling out his radio. "This situation is more complex than we initially anticipated." The gathered crowd pressed closer, their curiosity mixed with growing concern about what had been discovered. Mrs. Patterson clutched her cardigan more tightly, while Dr. Thompson moved closer to get a better view of the proceedings. "What do you see down there?" Captain Rodriguez asked, positioning his own flashlight to supplement the inspector's examination. "There are definitely obstructions in the drainage system, and there's evidence of recent activity. But I can also hear sounds that suggest—" Chief Inspector Hayes paused, his professional demeanor betraying a moment of uncertainty. "We need to proceed very carefully from this point forward." Apollo's calls from across the street had evolved into what could only be described as encouragement. The White Cub's vocalizations now carried a different tone, almost as if he was trying to reassure whatever lay below that rescue was finally at hand. The acoustic monitoring equipment was picking up increasingly clear sounds from the underground system. Dr. Hayes could now distinguish what appeared to be multiple sources of sound, suggesting that whatever was trapped down there was not alone. "I'm hearing at least 3 distinct vocalizations," she reported to Sarah. "The patterns suggest different sizes and possibly different types of animals." This revelation sent a ripple of understanding through the assembled group. If multiple animals were trapped in the drainage system, it would explain both the complexity of Apollo's response and the urgency he had been displaying for the past 2 days. Chief Inspector Hayes called for additional specialized equipment and personnel, including animal control officers and representatives from the county health department. The scope of the situation was clearly beyond what his utility team could handle alone. As the afternoon progressed toward evening, temporary lighting was installed around the access point to facilitate the continued investigation. The gathered crowd of neighbors and zoo personnel maintained their vigil, united by the shared understanding that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Apollo remained at his post by the fence, his white coat gleaming under the zoo's security lights. As darkness approached, his calls had become softer but more frequent, a continuous reassurance to whatever lay hidden in the underground darkness. Sarah knew that the next phase of the investigation would determine not only what had been concealed beneath their quiet community, but also reveal the full extent of Apollo's remarkable intuition. The white lion cub had somehow sensed a crisis that human technology and observation had completely missed, and his persistent vigil was about to expose secrets that would challenge everything they thought they knew about the neighborhood they called home. The specialized animal rescue team arrived just as the last rays of sunlight faded behind the oak trees lining Cedar Avenue. Leading the group was Officer Lisa Martinez, a seasoned animal control specialist with 12 years of experience handling complex rescue situations. Her team included 2 additional officers and Dr. Amanda Foster, a veterinarian who specialized in emergency animal medicine. Apollo's behavior had remained remarkably consistent throughout the evening. though Sarah noticed that his calls had taken on an almost rhythmic quality, as if he was maintaining a steady communication pattern with whatever lay beneath the street. The white cub had refused his evening meal, dedicating all of his energy to his vigil. In all my years of animal rescue work, I've never seen a situation quite like this, Officer Martinez confided to Sarah as they reviewed the acoustic recordings that Dr. Hayes had compiled. The fact that this lion cub detected the situation before any human noticed is remarkable, but his sustained communication effort suggests a level of empathy and intelligence that's truly extraordinary. The hydraulic equipment had successfully loosened the access cover, but Chief Inspector Hayes wanted to proceed with extreme caution. The unusual sealing of the cover, combined with the acoustic evidence of multiple trapped animals, suggested that they were dealing with a deliberate situation rather than an accidental occurrence. Before we fully remove this cover, I want everyone to understand what we might be facing, Chief Inspector Hayes addressed the assembled team. The evidence suggests that animals have been deliberately placed in this drainage system, which means we could be looking at a case of abandonment or worse. Dr. Foster positioned her emergency medical equipment near the access point, preparing for whatever condition the trapped animals might be in. Her portable examination table was equipped with warming lights, oxygen supplementation, and a full range of emergency medications. Based on the acoustic analysis, we're expecting to find small animals, possibly very young ones, she explained to her team. After being trapped in an underground drainage system for an unknown period, they'll likely be suffering from dehydration, hypothermia, and extreme stress. As the final preparations were completed, Apollo's calls from across the street intensified. The white cub seemed to sense that the crucial moment was approaching and was doing everything possible to provide encouragement and location guidance to both the rescuers and the trapped animals below. Mrs. Patterson had invited several neighbors into her home to watch the proceedings from her front window, providing hot coffee and sandwiches to the rescue workers. The elderly woman had lived in the neighborhood for over 40 years and was deeply disturbed by the possibility that such a situation had been developing literally beneath her feet. "I walk past that spot every day on my way to the grocery store," she told Dr. Thompson, who had remained to assist with the investigation. "To think that innocent animals might have been suffering down there while I was just going about my normal routine. It's heartbreaking." The moment of truth arrived at 8:47 p.m. when Chief Inspector Hayes gave the signal to fully remove the access cover. The hydraulic equipment lifted the heavy concrete disc away from the opening, revealing a dark shaft that descended into the municipal drainage system. The first thing that struck everyone was the smell. The air that rose from the opening carried the unmistakable odors of dampness, waste, and something else that made Dr. Foster immediately reach for her emergency medical kit. "There are definitely animals down there," she confirmed, pulling on surgical gloves and preparing a high-powered flashlight. "And based on what I'm detecting, they've been there for quite some time." Chief Inspector Hayes was the first to peer into the opened access point, his expression growing more serious as he examined the underground space. The drainage tunnel was larger than expected, with a concrete floor that showed clear evidence of recent habitation. "I can see movement down there," he reported, adjusting his flashlight to get a better view. "There appear to be several small animals, and they seem to be responding to our light and voices." Apollo's calls from across the street had become a continuous stream of low, encouraging vocalizations. The white cub was positioned as close to the fence as possible, his entire body language communicating both urgency and hope. Dr. Foster carefully lowered herself into the access opening using a specialized ladder that the fire department had, positioned for safe entry. Her flashlight beam swept across the underground space, revealing a scene that was both heartbreaking and infuriating. "We have multiple animals down here," she called up to the surface team. "I can see at least 3 small dogs and what appear to be 2 cats. They're alive, but they're in very poor condition." The rescue operation began immediately, with Dr. Foster working carefully to assess each animal's condition before attempting to move them. The first to be brought to the surface was a small mixed-breed puppy, probably no more than 8 weeks old, who was trembling with cold and fear. "This little one is severely dehydrated and hypothermic," Dr. Foster announced as she passed the puppy up to Officer Martinez. "But he's alert and responsive, which is encouraging." Apollo's reaction to the emergence of the first rescued animal was immediate and dramatic. The white cub's calls became louder and more frequent, and he began pacing excitedly along the fence line. It was as if he understood that his persistent vigil had finally achieved its purpose. The second animal to be rescued was a slightly larger puppy, a female who appeared to be from the same litter as the first. She was in similar condition, but showed signs of having protected and cared for her smaller companion during their underground ordeal. "These two have definitely been looking out for each other," Dr. Foster observed as she continued her underground assessment. "Their positioning suggests that the larger female has been sharing body heat with the smaller male." The third puppy brought to the surface was in the most critical condition. A tiny male with distinctive black and white markings, he was barely responsive and required immediate warming and hydration. Dr. Foster worked quickly to stabilize him before continuing with the rescue operation. "We need to get these puppies to the veterinary clinic immediately," she announced to the assembled team. "But I can see 2 more animals down here that also need our help." The first cat to be rescued was a small tabby, probably around 10 weeks old, who had managed to find a slightly higher and drier area of the drainage tunnel. Despite her ordeal, she showed remarkable spirit, purring weakly when Dr. Foster gently picked her up. The final animal in the underground space was another kitten, a small, black and white female who had positioned herself near the area where Apollo's calls would have been most audible. Dr. Foster suspected that this kitten had been responding to the lion cub's vocalizations throughout the rescue operation. "All 5 animals are now safely on the surface," Dr. Foster reported as she emerged from the drainage access point. "They're all alive, but they need immediate medical attention and extended care." As the rescued animals were being prepared for transport to the emergency veterinary facility, Chief Inspector Hayes made another disturbing discovery in the underground space. Using his flashlight to conduct a more thorough examination, he found evidence that the drainage tunnel had been deliberately modified to serve as a makeshift shelter. "There are containers down here, blankets, and what appears to be food storage," he reported to Officer Martinez. "This wasn't a case of animals accidentally falling into the drainage system. Someone deliberately placed them here." The implications of this discovery sent a wave of anger and sadness through the assembled crowd. The realization that someone had intentionally abandoned helpless animals in such a confined and dangerous space was almost too much to comprehend. Apollo seemed to sense that the immediate crisis had been resolved. His calls became softer and less frequent, though he continued to watch the rescue operation with obvious interest. The white cub had successfully communicated the location and urgency of the situation, and his extraordinary behavior had saved 5 innocent lives. As the rescue vehicles departed for the veterinary clinic, carrying their precious cargo of recovered animals, Sarah knew that this was far from the end of the story. The discovery of the deliberately modified drainage space suggested that there were still many questions to be answered about how this situation had developed and who was responsible for putting these helpless creatures in such danger. The following morning brought a mixture of relief and determination to the Riverside Zoo community. Dr. Foster had worked through the night at the Cedar Falls Emergency Veterinary Clinic, and her early morning report was cautiously optimistic. All 5 rescued animals were stable, responding well to treatment, and showing remarkable resilience considering their ordeal. Apollo's behavior had undergone a dramatic transformation overnight. For the first time in 3 days, the white lion cub was found playing with his enrichment toys when Sarah arrived for her morning rounds. His appetite had returned, and he showed interest in interacting with his caretakers, though he still occasionally glanced toward the fence where his vigil had taken place. "It's like he knows his job is done," Marcus observed, watching Apollo chase a large rubber ball around his enclosure. "But I get the feeling this isn't over yet." Marcus's intuition proved correct when Chief Inspector Hayes called Sarah with an urgent request to meet at the drainage access site. Overnight, his team had conducted a more thorough investigation of the underground space and had made discoveries that expanded the scope of the situation far beyond what anyone had initially imagined. "We need to show you what we found down there," Chief Inspector Hayes explained when Sarah, Marcus, and Dr. Hayes arrived at Cedar Avenue. The access point remained open, surrounded by temporary barriers and crime scene tape that had been installed by the police department. Detective Rachel Kim, a sharp-eyed investigator with the Cedar Falls Police Department, had been assigned to lead the criminal investigation into the animal abandonment case. Her 15 years of experience in investigating various forms of neglect and abuse had prepared her for many situations. But the evidence discovered in the drainage system presented a particularly complex puzzle. What we initially thought was a simple case of animal abandonment appears to be part of a much larger operation, Detective Kim explained as she reviewed her preliminary findings. "The underground space has been extensively modified, and we found evidence suggesting that this has been going on for a considerable period of time." Chief Inspector Hayes led the group to the edge of the access opening, where a more sophisticated ladder system had been installed to facilitate safe investigation. The morning sunlight streaming into the underground space revealed details that had been difficult to see in the previous evening's emergency lighting. "The first thing we noticed is the extent of the modifications," he pointed out, directing their attention to various features of the drainage tunnel. "This space has been deliberately altered to serve as a holding area. There are platforms constructed from concrete blocks, drainage systems to manage water flow, and evidence of regular human access." Dr. Hayes documented everything with her camera, while Sarah tried to process the implications of what they were seeing. The realization that someone had put significant time and effort into creating this underground facility made the abandonment of the animals even more disturbing. "But that's not the most concerning discovery," Detective Kim continued, producing several evidence bags containing items that had been recovered from the drainage space. "We found a substantial amount of expired pet food, medical supplies, and documentation that suggests this operation involved many more animals than the 5 we rescued yesterday." The evidence bags contained veterinary supplies that were well past their expiration dates, including syringes, medications, and treatment records, with dates spanning several months. The documentation showed a pattern of activity that indicated the underground space had been used regularly for an extended period. "The records suggest that dozens of animals may have passed through this location," Detective Kim explained, her expression reflecting the gravity of the situation. Most of the documentation is incomplete or damaged, but what we can read indicates that someone was using this space as a temporary holding facility. Sarah felt a wave of nausea as she contemplated the full scope of what had been happening beneath their peaceful community. The thought that so many animals had suffered while life continued normally above ground was almost overwhelming. Marcus examined some of the recovered items, his expression growing more troubled with each piece of evidence. This looks like someone was trying to provide medical care but didn't have proper facilities or training. Some of these medications are completely inappropriate for the animals they were supposedly treating. The investigation team had also discovered several makeshift containers that had been used to store water and food, though many showed signs of contamination and neglect. The overall picture that emerged was of an operation that had started with perhaps good intentions, but had deteriorated into a dangerous and harmful situation. We're working with the county health department to trace the sources of these supplies, Detective Kim reported. The veterinary medications require prescriptions, so there should be records of who obtained them and when. Dr. Hayes studied the layout of the underground space, trying to understand how the animals' distress calls had been audible to Apollo despite being contained within the concrete drainage system. Her acoustic analysis suggested that the modifications to the space had inadvertently created resonance patterns that amplified sounds upward toward the street level. Apollo's exceptional hearing allowed him to detect sounds that were just barely reaching the surface, she explained. The concrete modifications actually created an acoustic pathway that carried the animals' vocalizations upward through specific frequency ranges that lions are particularly sensitive to. As the investigation continued, Mrs. Patterson approached the group with information that added another disturbing dimension to the case. The elderly woman had been reviewing her daily routines and had recalled several instances over the past few months when she had noticed unusual activity near the drainage access point. I remember seeing a van parked near this spot several times, usually very early in the morning or late at night, she told Detective Kim. I thought it was just utility workers or contractors, so I didn't pay much attention. But now that I think about it, the timing was odd, and I never saw any official city markings on the vehicle. This eyewitness account provided the first concrete lead in identifying who might have been responsible for the underground operation. Detective Kim immediately began coordinating with traffic enforcement to review any available security camera footage from the neighborhood that might have captured images of the suspicious vehicle. The morning's discoveries were interrupted by an urgent call from Dr. Foster at the veterinary clinic. Her voice carried a mixture of excitement and concern as she reported on the condition of the rescued animals. The good news is that all 5 animals are responding well to treatment and appear to be out of immediate danger, she began. But I've made some discoveries during my examinations that you need to know about. These animals show signs of having received veterinary care recently, but it was clearly provided by someone without proper training or facilities. Dr. Foster's findings included evidence of recent vaccination attempts, though the injection sites showed signs of infection and improper technique. Several of the animals had also received treatments for various conditions, but the medications used were either inappropriate or administered incorrectly. Whoever was caring for these animals had access to veterinary supplies and was attempting to provide medical care, Dr. Foster continued. But their lack of proper training and facilities actually made the animals' conditions worse in many cases. This revelation added another layer of complexity to the investigation. Rather than a simple case of animal abandonment, they were now dealing with what appeared to be an unauthorized veterinary operation that had been conducted in dangerous and unsanitary conditions. Apollo's role in exposing this hidden operation was becoming even more remarkable as the full scope of the situation emerged. The white lion cub's persistent vigil had not only saved 5 innocent animals, but had also revealed a larger pattern of neglect and potentially illegal activity that had been operating undetected in their community. As the investigation team prepared to expand their search to other potential drainage access points in the neighborhood, Sarah realized that Apollo's extraordinary behavior had opened a window into a hidden world that existed parallel to their everyday lives. The white cub's intuitive understanding of animal distress had exposed secrets that human observation and technology had completely missed. The implications of their discoveries were still unfolding, but one thing was certain: the quiet community of Cedar Falls would never look at their underground infrastructure the same way again. Apollo had shown them that even in the most unexpected places, innocent lives could be suffering in silence, waiting for someone with the compassion and determination to hear their calls for help. 3 days after the dramatic rescue, Detective Kim's investigation had expanded to include multiple city departments and state animal welfare agencies. The scope of the underground operation was becoming clearer, and the evidence pointed to a situation that was both more complex and more heartbreaking than anyone had initially imagined. The breakthrough came when the county health department successfully traced the veterinary supplies found in the drainage system. Dr. Patricia Wellness, a recently retired veterinarian who had practiced in Cedar Falls for over 20 years, had reported several break-ins at her former clinic over the past 6 months. The stolen items matched exactly with the supplies recovered from the underground space. What's particularly troubling is that whoever took these supplies had enough knowledge to select specific medications and equipment, Dr. Wellness explained to Detective Kim during their interview. This wasn't a random theft. Someone with veterinary knowledge was deliberately acquiring these materials. The investigation took an unexpected turn when Mrs. Patterson remembered additional details about the mysterious van she had observed. Working with a police sketch artist, she was able to provide a detailed description that led to the identification of the vehicle through traffic camera records. The van belonged to Janet Morrison, a 43-year-old former veterinary technician who had lost her license 3 years earlier due to practice violations. Morrison had been working without authorization, treating animals in unsafe conditions, and had been prohibited from any further veterinary practice. Janet Morrison presents a complex case, Detective Kim explained to Sarah and the zoo team during a briefing at the police station. Our investigation suggests that she genuinely believed she was helping animals, but her methods were dangerous and illegal. The full story that emerged was both tragic and infuriating. Morrison had been secretly collecting abandoned and stray animals throughout the region, attempting to provide them with medical care using her expired veterinary knowledge and stolen supplies. However, her lack of proper facilities and her prohibition from practice meant that her efforts often caused more harm than good. She was using the drainage system as a temporary holding facility while she tried to treat sick or injured animals. Detective Kim continued, but without proper equipment, medication, or legal authority, many of her efforts were unsuccessful. The investigation revealed that Morrison had been operating this underground network for nearly 8 months, moving animals between various makeshift facilities throughout the city's drainage system. The 5 animals that Apollo had detected were among the most recent arrivals, placed there just days before the white lion cub began his vigil. Dr. Foster's analysis of the rescued animals supported this timeline. The medical evidence shows that these animals had been in Morrison's care for only a short time, she reported. Their overall health suggests they were relatively well cared for before being placed in the drainage system, which was likely intended as a very temporary measure. The most disturbing aspect of Morrison's operation was discovered when police searched additional drainage access points throughout the neighborhood. Evidence suggested that dozens of animals had passed through her underground network, though the outcomes for many of them remained unclear. We found records indicating that Morrison was attempting to place animals in homes after treating them, Detective Kim explained. But her illegal status meant that she couldn't work with legitimate animal welfare organizations, so she was operating entirely outside the established rescue system. Apollo's extraordinary behavior during this investigation had not gone unnoticed by the broader community. Local news outlets had picked up the story of the white lion cub who detected the underground animal rescue operation, and the tale had quickly spread through social media and national news networks. Sarah found herself fielding calls from reporters, animal welfare advocates, and other zoos interested in Apollo's remarkable demonstration of interspecies empathy. The white cub had become a symbol of animal intuition and compassion, inspiring donations and support for animal rescue organizations throughout the region. Apollo's story has touched people all over the country, Sarah told Marcus as they watched the young lion play in his enclosure. We've received offers of support for animal rescue programs, funding for improved zoo facilities, and requests from researchers who want to study animal communication and empathy. The investigation culminated when Morrison was located and agreed to cooperate fully with authorities. Her arrest was conducted quietly, with an understanding that while her methods were illegal and dangerous, her motivations appeared to stem from a genuine desire to help animals in need. Janet Morrison is a complicated case, Detective Kim explained to the assembled community members during a public meeting at the Cedar Falls Community Center. Her actions were illegal and put animals at risk, but she appears to have been motivated by a misguided attempt to address what she saw as inadequate animal welfare resources in our region. During her interview with police, Morrison expressed deep remorse for the dangerous conditions she had created and admitted that her prohibition from veterinary practice had led her to make increasingly desperate decisions about how to help animals in need. I knew what I was doing was wrong, but I couldn't stand to see animals suffering when I had the knowledge to help them, Morrison told Detective Kim. I thought the drainage system would be a safe, temporary solution, but I realize now that I was putting them in even greater danger. The legal resolution of Morrison's case involved a complex agreement that took into account both her illegal actions and her genuine concern for animal welfare. Rather than facing extended incarceration, she agreed to community service working with legitimate animal rescue organizations under proper supervision. Ms. Morrison will be required to complete extensive retraining and will work only under the direct supervision of licensed veterinarians, Detective Kim announced. Her knowledge and experience can be valuable assets to the animal welfare community, but only when applied within legal and safe parameters. The rescued animals had become local celebrities in their own right. The 3 puppies and 2 kittens were recovering well under Dr. Foster's care, and applications for adoption had poured in from throughout the region. The Cedar Falls Animal Welfare Society had received enough donations inspired by Apollo's story to fund expanded rescue operations for the next 2 years. The community response has been overwhelming, reported Jennifer Walsh, the zoo's education coordinator who had been coordinating with local animal welfare groups. Apollo's story has inspired people to get involved in animal rescue efforts and has raised awareness about the need for improved support for both stray animals and people who want to help them. Dr. Hayes had been documenting Apollo's behavior throughout the investigation, and her findings were being compiled for publication in veterinary and animal behavior journals. The white lion cub's ability to detect and respond to animal distress across species barriers represented a significant addition to the scientific understanding of animal empathy and communication. Apollo demonstrated sustained, purposeful communication, behavior that continued for days until human intervention resolved the crisis. Dr. Hayes explained in her preliminary report, this level of interspecies empathy and problem-solving behavior has rarely been documented in captive wildlife. As the investigation concluded and the community began to process everything that had been revealed, Apollo seemed to return completely to his normal playful behavior. The white cub showed no lingering effects from his intense vigil, though zoo staff noticed that he appeared more alert to sounds and activities beyond his enclosure. It's like he's appointed himself as our early warning system, Marcus observed with a mixture of pride and amazement. Apollo has shown us that animals can be our partners in identifying problems and protecting vulnerable members of our community. The transformation in community awareness about animal welfare issues was perhaps the most lasting impact of the entire incident. Local schools had begun incorporating lessons about animal empathy and rescue into their curricula, and several new volunteer programs had been established to support legitimate animal welfare organizations. As Sarah reflected on the events of the past week, she realized that Apollo's remarkable behavior had revealed not just a hidden crisis, but also the tremendous capacity for compassion that existed within their community when people were made aware of problems and given appropriate channels for helping to solve them. 6 months after Apollo's remarkable vigil, the Riverside Zoo had been transformed into something far greater than anyone could have imagined. The white lion cub's extraordinary demonstration of interspecies empathy had sparked a movement that reached far beyond the borders of Cedar Falls, Iowa. The most visible change was the new Apollo Center for Animal Welfare, a state-of-the-art facility that had been constructed adjacent to the African Savannah exhibit. Funded entirely by donations inspired by Apollo's story, the center served as both an educational space and a working animal rescue facility operated in partnership with legitimate animal welfare organizations. What Apollo showed us is that compassion doesn't have a voice, but those who know how to listen can understand even silence. Sarah read from the bronze plaque mounted at the center's entrance. The words had become the motto for a new philosophy of animal care that emphasized the importance of paying attention to subtle signs of distress and need. Dr. Foster had accepted a position as the center's director, bringing her expertise in emergency animal medicine to a facility designed to provide proper care for rescued animals while they awaited placement in permanent homes. The center's state-of-the-art veterinary clinic ensured that no animal would ever again have to suffer from inadequate medical care. We've created a model that other communities can replicate, Dr. Foster explained to a group of visiting veterinarians and animal welfare advocates. The Apollo Center demonstrates how proper facilities, trained personnel, and community support can address animal welfare needs without the dangerous shortcuts that led to the underground operation. Apollo himself had become an international celebrity, featured in documentaries, children's books, and scientific publications about animal intelligence and empathy. Despite all the attention, the white lion cub remained remarkably unchanged, continuing to play, learn, and grow under the devoted care of Sarah and Marcus. The 5 animals that Apollo had helped rescue had all found loving homes within the Cedar Falls community. The 3 puppies, now healthy and vibrant, had been adopted by families who had been directly involved in the rescue operation. Mrs. Patterson had adopted one of the kittens, naming her Hope, while the other kitten found a home with Dr. Thompson, who had been so impressed by Apollo's behavior. These animals have become living symbols of Apollo's legacy, Marcus observed as he watched the white cub interact with a group of visiting school children. Every time someone sees them thriving in their new homes, they're reminded of the power of paying attention to those who need help. Janet Morrison had successfully completed her community service and retraining program, eventually finding employment as an animal care technician at the Apollo Center under Dr. Foster's supervision. Her experience, when properly channeled and legally practiced, had proven valuable in developing protocols for handling rescued animals with complex medical needs. Janet's story reminds us that the desire to help animals is admirable, but it must be guided by proper training, legal authority, and appropriate facilities. Dr. Foster noted during a presentation to veterinary students. Her genuine concern for animal welfare, when redirected through legitimate channels, has become an asset to our community's rescue efforts. The impact on Cedar Falls had been profound and lasting. The city had invested in upgrading its infrastructure monitoring systems to prevent future unauthorized use of municipal facilities, while also establishing clear protocols for residents to report suspected animal welfare issues. Detective Kim had been promoted and now headed a specialized unit focused on animal welfare investigations throughout the region. Her experience with the Morrison case had led to the development of new approaches for handling situations where illegal but well-intentioned actions intersected with legitimate animal welfare concerns. Apollo's vigil taught us that sometimes the most important signals come from unexpected sources, Detective Kim explained during a conference on animal welfare law enforcement. We've learned to pay more attention to unusual animal behavior as a potential indicator of hidden problems. The scientific community had embraced Apollo's story as a groundbreaking example of animal cognition and empathy. Dr. Hayes had published several papers documenting the white lion cub's behavior, contributing to a growing body of research on interspecies communication and animal emotional intelligence. Apollo demonstrated sustained, purposeful behavior aimed at protecting members of other species. Dr. Hayes presented to an international conference on animal behavior. This level of cross-species empathy challenges our understanding of animal consciousness and moral reasoning. The educational impact had been equally significant. Schools throughout the region had developed curricula based on Apollo's story, teaching children about animal empathy, the importance of reporting suspected animal abuse, and the proper channels for helping animals in need. Emily Chen, now 9 years old, had become one of the Apollo Center's youngest volunteer guides, sharing the story of how her observations during Apollo's vigil had helped adults understand the seriousness of the situation. Her mother, Dr. Chen, had been inspired to establish a scholarship fund for veterinary students interested in animal welfare work. Apollo showed us that paying attention to small signs can lead to big discoveries, Emily explained to groups of visiting children. Even when grown-ups didn't understand what was happening, Apollo knew that someone needed help, and he didn't give up until help arrived. The anniversary of Apollo's vigil had become an annual Animal Empathy Day in Cedar Falls, with events throughout the community focused on promoting animal welfare awareness and celebrating the human-animal bond. The day featured adoption events, educational programs, and fundraising activities for animal rescue organizations. Sarah stood in Apollo's enclosure on this first anniversary, watching the white lion cub play with his favorite enrichment toys. At 18 months old, Apollo had grown considerably but retained the playful curiosity and remarkable sensitivity that had made him famous. "You changed everything, didn't you?" Sarah said softly, offering Apollo a favorite treat. "You showed us that compassion doesn't need words, that paying attention can save lives, and that even the smallest voice crying for help deserves to be heard." Apollo approached Sarah with his characteristic gentle demeanor, accepting the treat while maintaining eye contact that seemed to convey understanding far beyond his years. The white cub had become more than just a zoo attraction. He had become a living symbol of the power of empathy and the importance of listening to those who cannot speak for themselves. The celebration continued throughout the day, with hundreds of community members visiting the zoo to honor Apollo's legacy and learn about ongoing animal welfare efforts. Children drew pictures of Apollo and the rescued animals, while adults signed pledges to support local animal rescue organizations. As the sun set over Cedar Falls on this special anniversary, Sarah reflected on how one small white lion cub had transformed not just a zoo, but an entire community's understanding of compassion and responsibility. Apollo's vigil had revealed that heroism comes in many forms, and sometimes the most profound acts of courage involve simply refusing to look away when others are suffering. The legacy of Apollo's remarkable behavior would continue to inspire people around the world, reminding them that true compassion knows no boundaries between species and that those who listen carefully can hear the silent calls for help that surround us every day. Dear friends, we hope Apollo's extraordinary story has moved you as much as it has touched the hearts of the Cedar Falls community. This tale of courage, compassion, and the unbreakable bonds between all living creatures reminds us that heroism often comes from the most unexpected places. Just like Apollo refused to abandon those in need, we invite you to join our community of storytellers who believe in the power of empathy and hope. If this story has inspired you, please subscribe to our channel and hit that like button to help us share more uplifting tales that celebrate the extraordinary connections between humans and animals. Share your own stories of animal compassion. In the comments below, we would love to hear how animals have touched your life or how you've helped those who cannot speak for themselves. Together, we can create a world where every silent call for help is heard and answered with love. Don't miss our upcoming stories that explore the amazing bonds that unite all living creatures. Thank you for being part of our community of compassion.